Friends, peace be with you. Welcome back as we preview the lectionary readings for the fourth Sunday after Epiphany. Micah chapter 6, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and Matthew chapter 5. These readings, they confront one of the most deeply ingrained assumptions that we carry. That strength looks a certain way, that success looks a certain way, and that blessing looks a certain way. What we discover this week is that God does not measure life the way the world does. And that realization, it changes everything. So we begin with Micah and God's question. It starts like a courtroom drama. God summons the mountains and the hills as witnesses and asks this piercing question. "O my people, what have I done to you? And what have I wearied you? Answer me." This is not the voice of an angry tyrant. This is the voice of a wounded lover. See, God reminds Israel of all that God has done, delivering them from slavery, guiding them through the wilderness, giving them leaders, protecting them again and again. And then Israel responds with anxiety. What more do you want from us? More sacrifices, more offerings, bigger gifts? God answers with one of the most famous summaries of faith in all of the scriptures. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God? Notice here what God doesn't ask for. God doesn't ask for religious excess or spiritual performance or impressive displays of devotion. God desires a life shaped by justice and mercy and humility. Faith that shows up in how we live with one another. A daily walk, not some religious spectacle. Okay, that theme continues in 1 Corinthians, where Paul tackles another assumption. That wisdom and strength look obvious. Paul here says something astonishing. The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. I mean, if you really think about it, the cross doesn't make any sense by our worldly standards. It's a weakness where we expect strength, especially from God. It's a defeat where we expect victory. It's suffering where we expect glory. But here Paul reminds the Corinthians and us that God consistently chooses what the world overlooks. God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise, what is weak to shame the strong. Why does God do this? So that none of us can boast. So that salvation is clearly God's work, not ours. So that grace remains grace. If the prophet Micah is telling us what God desires, then Paul is showing us how God works quietly, unexpectedly, through things that don't look impressive at first glance. And that brings us to our gospel reading this week, the famous one, the Beatitudes from Matthew chapter 5. Jesus is sitting on the hillside, opening his mouth and redefining blessing itself. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful. This is not a list of virtues to achieve. It's a declaration of who God is already drawing near to. Jesus, you don't hear him say, blessed are the powerful or the successful or the self-sufficient. He says, blessed are those who know their needs. The Beatitudes is turning the world upside down, the world's perspective upside down. The poor are promised the kingdom of heaven. The grieving are promised comfort. The meek are promised the earth. This is the light of Epiphany at its brightest, revealing that God's reign shows up precisely where you and I least expect it. So what's it all mean? Well, taken together, these readings proclaim this single countercultural truth that God is not impressed by your religious performance. God is not persuaded by your power. God's not revealed through domination or success in this world. Instead, God's revealed in humility. God's wisdom is shown in the cross. God's blessing rests on those who trust in God, not in themselves. Micah is calling us to walk humbly. Paul is pointing us to the foolish wisdom of the cross. Jesus is naming the overlooked as blessed. And in doing so, God is inviting all of us to stop. Stop chasing the world's definitions of success and start living into the reality that is the kingdom of heaven. So as you approach this fourth Sunday after Epiphany, please listen closely. Where might God be calling you to simplicity instead of performance? Where might God be redefining what wisdom is in your life? Where might blessing already be present, hidden in the places that you and I have learned to overlook? Thanks for joining me. I look forward to worshiping with you this Sunday as we hear again the surprising and gracious and upside down good news of Jesus Christ. Grace and peace.